New York City, San Francisco, Sweden, Germany, and India. His works are part of the collections of the Museum of Tel Aviv, the Museum of Ramat Gan, the Peter Bloom Gallery, the Mark Rich Foundation, the French Institute, as well as several private collections. Tchetchik divides his time between personal projects and documentary assignments. Many times each approach provides inspiration for the other. His editorial work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Frankfurter Allgemeine, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and more. In 2015, Tchetchik's series Sunburn won Series of the Year award in the local testimony competition, and Tchetchik's series Dark Waters, which was commissioned by the Red Cross and published by Kara Verlag, will be displayed in the Castle Museum in Germany in April of 2021. Daniel was originally scheduled to join us in person in Waterville for a 2-month residency, but given the current state of affairs, we've postponed and are so grateful to be able to connect digitally despite the distance and the times. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Daniel, who is joining us from Tel Aviv, where the local time is about 7 in the evening.
Yes, all true. So thank you, Sarah. You basically took all I wanted to say. I think that's basically my whole lecture right there. Thank you guys for coming out on a Sunday or coming in. I think we have to change the way we say things today. We're coming in and not coming out, but thank you for joining us or joining me. I'm going to tell you a bit about my work also at the newspaper, also as a photographer, how this whole thing started, which I always kind of look back every once in a while and try to figure out how I am where I am if I end up suddenly in the middle of Italy taking pictures on the sea, and suddenly I stop and I say, how does this whole thing evolve? So first of all, people ask me, how did I start to photograph? And the truth is, I started photographing before I ever had a camera. I moved a lot as a child from Germany to Israel to the United States, had a very divided kind of childhood. And I guess I always had the need to savor the moment. I always felt things constantly changing, constantly in transition, and that need to freeze a frame and remember a certain time in my life was always something that was with me. So I would take pictures with my mind, not with the camera, because I was 4 or 5 years old, and I put it a file in my mind and I say, I want to go back and remember this moment. If it's my first basketball game, birthday parties, whatever it may be, I kind of opened a personal album in my mind so I could go back and remember where I was and how I felt at the time. The interesting thing is I also photographed things that were relatively uninteresting or mundane, if you will. Like if I'd stop and sit in the back seat at a stoplight with my family, I'd look out the window and I'd see a tree or the sunset or whatever it may be, and kind of take a picture just to kind of, freeze the moment. Life just goes by. I feel so fast in photography. First of all, before I even had a camera, the mind has the ability to kind of remember things. Later on in life, I discovered the camera. My father, who passed away many years ago, he wasn't a photographer, but he'd take a lot of pictures. He was constantly with a camera, obviously a film camera back then. So I guess it kind of went through genetics and through the household, so to speak. Later on, I discovered that the camera is not only something that can take a picture, but it can also convey an emotion. It can shine a light on something that's disturbing you. So that realization was really something that kind of changed my life. I was a horrible student throughout all my high school days or whatever it may be. And when I discovered photography, like everything changed for me. From somebody who couldn't concentrate in class and would cut class and go to the beach and go walk in Tel Aviv, go for long walks, suddenly I found something that really kind of took over my life. I won't tell you the whole story of how it happens. We don't have that much time, but it was also kind of, I guess, faith and luck combined. It depends on how you look at life. But photography was always with me. And when I started studying, within a week, it just kind of took over my life. And I found myself studying 16, 17 hours a day, staying at the library and photographing and developing and thinking and reading and just consuming everything that had to do with this amazing medium. So that's a very, very short description of the past 35 years or something like that. And I want to talk to you a bit about a few images from different projects that I took, which is actually kind of counterproductive to how I usually work, because I believe that photography today is built from stories. One image, the single image, has kind of lost its power due to many reasons of digital photography and the mass amount of images that are constantly flooding. I'm looking at like 25 pictures right now. So it's pretty insane how visual our life has become. And for me to kind of keep my identity as a photographer, I think that storytelling is really the most beautiful and most powerful tool that photography has. With that said, I was requested to select 9 or 10 images that kind of give some kind of overview of the past years. So I took it upon myself to kind of create a small series out of these projects. So I chose 9 or 10, I think it's 9 images at the end. I don't like even numbers, but that's not important. So I chose 9 images for you, and I'll give you a small background on each one. Obviously, if you have questions, you're more than welcome to type them in, and I'll answer to the best of my ability at the end of my short talk. So we can kind of put up the first slide now. Okay, so this first image is from a series called Beyond Dust and Light, which actually changed later on into a series called Sunburn. The thing about Israel, it's a very, very small country. I mean, you can drive north to south, which is the long drive, in about 5 hours, and from east to west in maybe an hour and a half if you're a very slow driver. So, so the interesting thing is I keep rediscovering this country time and again. United States, you can basically drive, I think, your whole life and keep discovering places and find new things. But in Israel, you keep going back to the same place. So you have to come with a different set of eyes and a different mindset, a different camera, a different tool. So this specific image, it's one of my favorite ones from the Sunburn series. It's a deserted airport in the south of Israel near a city called Arad. Arad is a very small town, about in 45 minutes from the Dead Sea. And the thing about my work, it's all about discovery. I drove to fill up gas, basically. And I saw that there was this small little unpaved road as it continues to the gas station. And I always ask myself, you know, kind of the road less traveled, so to speak. So every time I see an opportunity to go and investigate something, it really kind of inspires me. So I said, okay, I'll take a drive into nowhere, basically. And I started driving about 5 or 10 minutes, and I arrived at this really, really bizarre and haunting location. As you can see, everything deserted. If you look at the right side of the frame, you can see the Bedouin villages. Obviously, you can't identify the villages as Bedouin villages in the image, and I didn't want them to be identified. I just wanted them to be this, you know, far away towns, and that there's nothing near this empty place. This image is kind of reminiscent for those of you who know, very famous American photographer. He has well, not a similar image, but he has an image of a road that kind of, I think it's shot in the west part of the United States, that kind of goes into the horizon. And the interesting thing about this image, that it doesn't have that romantic feel to it. I mean, it takes you to a horizon, but at the same time, you've got this black matter that spits you back and kind of keeps you without the ability to kind of romantically disappear into the horizon of the image. And I kind of like that about that image, that it doesn't give you that freedom. This next image, go ahead. This next image was taken at the Sachne. The Sachne is kind of this this place that people go to swim up north. It's not a lake, but it's just this body of water, relatively small one, that I've photographed there endlessly. And during the summer of 2018, I was sent to photograph there for the newspaper. And they said, try to find a unique angle. And I said, look, I've been there like 1,000 times. How unique an angle can I find in a place, you know, that you've been time and time again? But that really is photography, and that really is life to me. How can I renew my point of view in a place that I've been time and again? And I think it's also a good lesson in life to kind of not get caught up in the daily life and see things the same way. So I went, and what I did is I bought a camera, an analog camera for that matter, which is water resistant, hopefully at least. And I decided to do this series underwater because I'd never seen how the daily life exists underwater in Israel. I'd always, obviously, you see the Sachna, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. And the most natural thing is to just stand there and take the picture of these people just bathing and having a good time. But again, what I wanted to do was find a different point of view, and I started diving about 3 or 4 feet underwater, and I found a completely different world with fish and beautiful color and people, how the point of view of people bathing underwater looks, and it really kind of blew my mind. I got about a 5-day commission to do this series, and I spent 3 weeks on it. I don't think I made much money out of it because I spent most of what I earned on gas and food and just sleeping all over Israel, because I was just kind of addicted to this new point of view. So I spent time also in the Sachne and also in the south, the very southern city of Eilat in Israel, which is a beautiful, beautiful place, and the water is transparent there. So the whole series focuses on the different bodies of water and how the leisure culture exists in Israel. So, yep, we can go to the next slide. This is another image from the Sunburn series. This is also an image that I like to talk about because it's where chance and luck and faith kind of collided in a very interesting collision. I went and I wanted to shoot the area of the Sea of in summer. There's crazy traffic and everywhere. I mean, it's very hard to get from one place to the next without it taking several hours. And when I got there, there was no room to park on the sidewalk. So I said I had to find a different place to put the car, and I drove into the parking lot, which, as you can see, it's not a parking lot, it's more like a dusty road. And I pulled into the dusty road and I got out of the car, and this is the thing that I saw in front of me. Right, like that was the first image that I took in the whole area. This was also shot with an analog camera. And I actually wanted to go and shoot the thing. I wanted to shoot these water slides much, much closer and show like the whole daily life activity and show the people. But suddenly this point of view from stepping back and seeing the complete picture from so far back, I think I really got lucky that there wasn't any parking, because I doubt that I would have walked and seen this point of view. On the other hand, it really kind of frustrates me because there's always another angle that you miss, you know? And I know that if I wouldn't, you know, if this wouldn't have, probably something else would have happened. And that's why it's very hard to kind of draw the line of when have I been in this place enough? When do I have the image that reflects that the series that I'm working on? So that's always a question. And this series really concentrates on the climate in Israel. Having grown up in the United States, I grew up in Boston, which is a very, very cold climate, at least during the winter. And in Israel, coming back and visiting in the summers, this is before we had these, you know, these tunnels that actually start right out of the airplane outside. So you're going from, let's say, -5 degrees to +35 degrees. That's in Fahrenheit, but, and it's really kind of, the sun hits you over the head with absolutely no warning. And the change in climate, I think, is really something that kind of shaped my personality. So this is also a subject that that really touched me deeply when I started working on it, especially in a country that's so diverse and there's so many religions and there's so many opinions. The heat is something that everybody suffers from, and it really kind of makes this world that I built, I feel, into a democratic sphere and not something that talks about divide. It talks about like uniting the country. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. This is an image that I took actually for the work at the newspaper. There was a water fight in Kikar Rabin, Rabin Square. It gave a very, very special and unique opportunity for teenagers and young people to kind of vent their frustration on police officers. Obviously, this is usually something you can't do. And they kind of, when the police came, they bombarded them with water balloons, which is obviously something that nobody's going to go to jail for or anything bad like that. So it was a very unique picture that I captured, this moment of the water actually looking like it's a shape of the revolution that kind of took place after everything dispersed and everything went back to normal as usual. But I think it was kind of a very unique day and an image that reflected also the joy and the energy in Israel and in Tel Aviv, but also the anger to some extent of a lot of things that go on. This is an image that I shot in 2004, also for the newspaper. It was a photo shoot for Comme Il Faut, which is a clothing company. It's I think it was just the beginning of summer, and while they were building the security fence or the security wall, whoever calls it a fence has not seen it. It's a very, very high wall. And I had this unique opportunity to show both sides of Jerusalem, the left side being the east side, the west side, the right side being the west side, and these two realities that exist in the same frame. And I've had very interesting analysis of this image, that many people say that the left side looks much more calm and much more relaxed and not this hustle bustle that the right side really kind of reflects the Western world and the competitive atmosphere, and the left side that people are just hanging out and having a good time or just taking it easy. So, and it's always been, well, not my dream, but an aspiration to show more than one reality within a single frame. The event really gave me the opportunity to present this unique point of view to show these two realities. And on the next slide, you'll see the series that I worked on, which is called Divided Moment. You don't have to go through it yet, just one more second. That's okay. Yeah. A series called Divided Moment. And this is something that I always try to kind of harness from my images, not just to like relax and say, okay, this is a good image, and this is a bad image, but can I also be inspired to take another step forward from something that I'm trying to say? Now we can go to the next image. And then this idea was born several years later, while I invited another photographer called Oren Israel to photograph with me. And the idea behind the series is to shoot exactly at the same time from two different point of views, which is actually stems from the previous image where I used obviously one image to show two realities. Here I'm breaking it up even into more spheres and into more worlds. And I really always felt that photography is reflects a certain truth, but it also reflects a certain lie. So I kind of wanted to talk about all the things that we don't see in an image, especially because we take these images for granted. We open the newspaper, we open a website, and we see this image and say, oh, this is horrific, or this is wonderful, but we never know what's going on 359 degrees around that certain image. And when we started working on this series, I was very, very excited that we kind of stumbled upon this idea, challenging, especially to work in atmospheres and in environments that aren't completely aligned with my normal environment. But I think we showed a lot of respect toward our surroundings, and were able to get a few really successful images. We worked on this series about 3 or 4 years. We got commissioned to do it also in the United States later on, and also in France. But I have to say, I don't think I have more than maybe 15 works tops that I'm really happy with. So that's about 3 or 4 years work and 15 works that I'm happy with, which is a very, very low percentage, obviously, of successes. But at the same time, I do think we did something substantial that kind of cracks the unbreakable a wall that photography kind of surrounds us with, or the unbreakable frame, that'd be a better wording than wall. Beyond those four lines that are truth, and here there's 8 lines, and there's 2 truths that hopefully asks what's the 3rd and 4th and 5th truth, and kind of, you know, dissolves the idea that our opinions are facts. It's all opinions, it's all points of views, and maybe that'll give us a little more freedom and a little more empathy towards each other. This is an image not shot in Israel. It's a series that I shot in North Sweden called Days Before Darkness. I wanted to go to a climate that's completely opposite of the one in Israel. And I thought North Sweden pretty much presents that opportunity. Embassy, which commissioned me to go to North Sweden for 10 days. And the thing is, they told me you can go to Sweden, but we only have time now, which was the end of November. We have funding now, we don't have it any other time. So we understand if you don't want to go because there's very little light and there's very little time to photograph. Do you still want to go? And I love challenges, and I thought that was a really good opportunity to kind of challenge myself to see what I could do. And that actually became, the challenge itself became the narrative of the work that I did. It's those days before the complete darkness of winter, which is obviously also a practical thing, but it's also kind of my poetic journal, creating how the days before the darkness look. And it's also relevant, I think, obviously for Sweden and the days before winter, the dark of winter, but also relevant for Israel and several parts of the world that I feel that we're going into darker times. This was before this horrible virus that's going on and many other things. So I think it was very reflective of things that I wanted to say. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is the last series that I really recently completed. It was actually published 2 weeks ago in the Haaretz Weekend Edition. What you see in the background is not Photoshop, and it's not put in by chance. These are the black billboards. These are billboards that were covered up in black cloth due to the crisis that we're going through now. Because we've been on lockdown for the past 2 months, no traffic, and there's no people to see the billboards. And so all the companies kind of withdrew their investments, and they were covered up in black cloth. And when I saw this, I said, this is really amazing. This is something that's definitely reflective also of our times, and definitely a point of view on the virus itself that nobody's really touched upon. People have shot the empty city, they've shot the masks, they've shot the empty streets time and again. And I didn't find something that I could do that I felt unique and that my language would kind of, take shape. And when I saw these billboards, I decided that this really is something that it really awoke something in me. And after I was at home, just going through my archive and scanning my negatives times and again, it really kind of motivated me to go out and shoot. If we can pull, I don't know how we are on time, but if we can pull up the other PDF that I wanted to show a bit how I work in terms of series and not only single images. I think this is a series that it's important to see a broader edit. So I call this Maybe It's a Sign. I think that's pretty obvious, the play of words here. And if we can, there's about 13 images here. We can run through them relatively fast. We don't have that much time. But I did want you to see how I build a series and not only just take single images, which I don't think really reflect the stories that obviously I was trying to say. Pictures are more sentences, and are more novel itself. So here you can see a few images of Tel Aviv and the area. Again, I tried to find a unique angle. I always waited that there'd be no cars, which wasn't difficult at all because there were barely no cars at all. And also, if you looked at these black frames from different angles, they really kind of looked like strange sculptures, and they were very, very haunting wherever you looked at them. But there were specific angles like the one you see here that really kind of hit home. I drove around them and I walked around them endlessly until I found the angles that I really wanted. This one was relatively easy on a bridge in Tel Aviv facing north. If you continue on, you'll see a few more. And it really kind of reflects how much of the public space is filled with advertising. It's really crazy. It looks like somebody really put these billboards into Photoshop just to kind of show us how much advertising is going on. And so this is also kind of, I think, a good reality check for us to see what's the right amount or the same amount of billboards that should be in the public space. Obviously, this is also these black frames. I think they kind of coincide with a lot that's been going on in Israel in terms of the democracy, not only in Israel, but also worldwide. But these are more reflective for what's going on here. There's a big organization of people who have been kind of rebelling against the government and walking, and parading with black flags. So these black frames, I think they're really indicative of these fairly dark times in terms of how far democracy has taken a hit. And I think I found a series that kind of illustrates this through my work in a very powerful way. So I wanted to end on a positive note. If we go back to the previous PDF, this is a series that I did 3 years back during the summer. I think I just talked about lack of democracy. There is still one wonderful, very, very democratic area in Israel, and that is the beach. I don't know why the left image didn't pull up, but it's not that important. So this is a series that I went all the way from, there it is, that I went all the way from Rosh Hanikah, which is the most northern point in Israel, and kind of drove and walked and took buses, hitchhiked all the way down the coast. You can see that these images are edited in a very, very high key. The whites are almost burnt out because this was like an effort to reflect how hot the sun is during the summer. It really kind of a blinding feel, and it's really hard actually to see, and it's very hard to photograph during these hours. But at the same time, it always kind of gives me hope to walk down the beach and see people from just dressed differently, acting differently, and nobody cares as long as they can go in the water and have fun and cool off from the hot sun. And there's rarely, if ever, any conflict at the beach. People get along and they just want to do the same thing, which is like hang out, have fun, relax, and live their life, which I think at the end of the day is what we all want. So every time I get very depressed to the current reality, I go photograph in the beach and remember that there is still a bit of hope for us. And I think that's, we'll end on that positive note. Yeah. Questions?
Beautiful. Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your work and your methods with us. It's, I think, a really interesting perspective for those of us who consume media, read the news, or see billboards, to sort of think about, like, take a step back and understand what the process is behind those stories and behind what we encounter every day. So let's see, I am just looking at the chat. First, since I have the floor, I sort of have the monopoly on question asking right now. I'm sort of curious, we're all spending time in the same neighborhoods and spaces right now, as people who are continually moving through these spaces. I see this parallel with your work where you go back to the same places over and over. And I'm sort of looking for some advice or insight on how to continue to rediscover the places that seem banal or too familiar right now.
That's a good and tough question. I'm not going to send you to become a photographer, but I do think that having a camera in your hand and looking through, the world through the camera really, really helps me and challenges me to see it, the world in a different way. If it's my kitchen table, if it's, you know, the steps outside, if it's my own backyard. When you don't have the camera, it's as, well, for me, it's as if I don't have a purpose. I don't think that's true for everybody, but that's the way I feel. And it's not only about getting my work out there, but I think the number one thing is, as you said, is seeing things differently. And going to places that you rarely would go to at a certain time, so you can see them in different light, like, which always helps, because light always changes the way things look, you know. I don't know, just be adventurous and go stand on your roof and lie on your back in the background and look at the clouds, and go to places exactly opposite to your instinct, and see where it takes you. I guess that would be my best advice.
Fabulous, thank you. There's a question here from Phyllis. Assuming you served in the Israeli army, maybe did you serve in the army? Were you able to use your photography during your service? And if so, in what way?
The answer is I wish. I think I kind of wasted those years on a very long saga with the army that I won't share with you now, but it was a very, very difficult time for me. I'm not completely built for that kind of life, but I did do 3 years in the army. I had a few good friends who are still photographers today, who were lucky enough to go and be army photographers, and they had a wonderful service, and they finished their service with amazing portfolio, obviously their access. And what took me about 7 years afterwards to find work at the newspaper, they basically took about 2 weeks after they finished the army, and they started working. So it's a bit of a painful spot for me. I mean, I wish I had that time, but at the end of the day, it made me who I am today. So it's all for the better, I guess, but it was difficult.
There's a question here about, you know, going further back before army service, whether you drew or journaled as a child, or whether taking photographs with your minds is really your primary mode of documenting and exploring the world around you.
Say that again. I'm not sure I completely understood the question.
Did you draw and journal as a child? I think people are curious about the way that you've been documenting, and maybe whether photography came from another place of wanting to capture the world.
I see. Photography, at the end of the day, I think for me comes from music. Music is the higher power. It's like, I think it's all arts aspire to be music at the end of the day. It's so pure, and either it works or it doesn't. Music doesn't have to sit and explain itself, and many times photography does. So I think most of my inspiration, if you're talking about other mediums, definitely came and comes from music, also from painting, but mostly music was always something that was with me from the age of 4 or 5. I'm just not a very talented musician, but so I think that's my main source of inspiration, yeah, for sure.
Beautiful. There's a question about a specific photograph that I can go back to, and I will in a second. Let me read the question. What were the scattered black things on the runway, the blown out plane tires? I think in the first image that you showed.
Yeah.
And
on the weekends,
folks.
After I finished photographing there and I was on my way out, yeah, you can pull it out. I think it's the first one. There it is. After I finished shooting here, and I spent quite a bit of time, I walked the whole runway back and forth, not only to photograph, but it was just like a very intense and special and strange experience. But while I was walking away, 4 or 5 motorbikes came into the runway and started kind of zooming back and forth at crazy speed. So I'm guessing this is kind of oil that spills over on this strip during the time that these motorbikes take advantage of the empty strips to see how fast their bikes can go.
Beautiful, thank you. There's a question in the chat. I think sort of asking about your work and maybe freedom of speech in Israel. Do you ever photograph sites, topics that run afoul with the government's preferred point of view? How do you, as a photographer, how do you navigate what stories you tell and what you don't, what perspectives you lift up in your work?
Very good question. Today, I think the situation that the country and the world is so divided that to kind of fuel one side of the story doesn't really help, even if it's the minority part of the story. You're just kind of fueling the fire. So I try to find subjects that affect everybody. Just not one group that's, look at this minority, they're not getting enough money, they're not getting enough whatever it may be. And I find that the most important subject today for me that inspires me and that's really relevant for everybody is the climate. As I said before, the heat here hits everybody in the same manner. It doesn't stop at the security wall. It doesn't stop anywhere, basically. So I think my main narrative, if you found a line that goes through all of them, if it's the happy people hanging out at the beach, if it's the more difficult image of that lost highway of the billboards, I think it's all about the climate, not only about the weather itself, but the climate as an atmosphere that we live in.
Beautiful. Anyone has any more questions, feel free to add them in the chat box. There's one about the last picture that we showed with the beach. Just wondering whether that was a current photo or an old one, because it seems like people aren't social distancing in that photo.
Which one, of the beach?
Of the beach, yeah, and I can share that one.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago.
That was 2 years ago, okay. Yeah, and then, I mean, I guess sort of from central Maine to Tel Aviv, what is life like there right now, Daniel? Can you give us just a little snapshot of what your reality is like?
Yeah, I can. We've been on lockdown on and off for the past 2 months. Nobody's quite sure why certain decisions are being made and at what timing. Schools are supposed to open up next week. I don't think anything's changed since a week ago. I don't really see the logic in it. I don't think anybody sees the logic in it, and we're kind of raising a huge question mark towards what is this thing and how many people have used it for their political gain, and in order not to have any riots or not to have any, any anti-government movements here. So it's a very, very strange time. It's a very hard time to know what to believe. I don't think that it's any different than all over the world that really don't know what to believe and how to act and what's dangerous and what's not, and how are we being manipulated by the circumstances. Obviously something's going on. I'm not trying to minimize the crisis. I'm just also, at the same sentence, I'm sure that a lot of people are taking massive advantage of the situation. If we look a few days back to Yom HaZikaron, which is the day of remembrance for Israeli soldiers that fell, they opened up IKEA and let people go shopping in IKEA, and at the same time, people could not go to the cemetery and be with their loved ones due to the circumstance. So it's become very, very extreme in terms of what's allowed and what's not. It really raises a very difficult question mark toward why certain decisions are being made.
There's another question in the chat that goes back to the series that you did with fellow photographer. And the question asks about the two different points of view and how important is it for us to know what exactly happened in that moment as opposed to viewing the moment without explanation. So we see that photo and can sort of guess at what's happening. How important is it that it be accompanied with explanation?
Well,
or
yeah, I think
perhaps.
this is the only series that I did that my hope is that you won't even think about those two images. My hope is that you'll think about the third image, photographed image, basically. Um, the whole concept of the series was to make a visual illustration, a visual discussion about what is the truth in photography, what is the right point of view. So it's really not a documentary by any sort. These are daily life situations with no true consequence. That's about as far as I want to go about what's happening in the image. But above that, I really would like for people to think what's happening in the third and fourth and fifth image that I'm not seeing. Or next time that they see a single image that's very provocative and difficult to see, think maybe there's something else going on. Just, I think it's very important to question everything and not in a manner that, okay, and find your own, options for the answer. Try to dig into it and find your own truth about it. But just know that what we're being shown, I won't say couldn't be farther from the truth, but it's one truth. And there are many more out there. And the most important truth is your own.
Beautiful. So there's one last question, and maybe we'll take this as the final question. And I know a little bit about having prepared this talk with you, but how has COVID and the situation that it has sort of drawn out specifically affected your work as a photographer?
Well, it definitely came at a very, very difficult time, I think, for everybody. And things are always on the horizon, or hopefully always on the horizon. But I really had a wonderful 6 months set up for myself, which starts with this wonderful invitation that I received from you guys to come to Colby that I was crazy excited about, still am. I haven't given up on you if you haven't given up on me. I had one of my biggest museum shows planned in Germany. I was invited to New York also to give a big lecture at NYU. I mean, there were so many things lined up. I had a story about Japanese surfing. I was supposed to go to Tokyo for 2 weeks and photograph the surfing scene leading up to the Olympics. So it was, I mean, there's just, line after line that I really had to confront and deal with a certain kind of loss that's happening in the same time. It's so much bigger than me that it wasn't like that somebody called me up and say, okay, this is canceled, which is always difficult. It's the whole world, and people, I'm at home and I have food and everybody's okay. So, when I take a step back and look at this in a wider perspective, I've been actually very happy during this time. Not happy that it's going on, but personally happy that everything's okay, and I'm trying to, stay focused on what I want to do. And when I saw the opportunity and the series of Black Billboards came up, I was inspired. It was a crazy experience driving these highways completely empty, much more than Yom Kippur, by the way. Everybody says, oh, it's like Yom Kippur. It's nothing like Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, the highways are packed with bikes and skateboards and people walking, but they're still packed. I drove for 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes, and I didn't see anybody. Drives that would take me an hour and a half on a Sunday morning, or Monday morning by your standards, on a Monday morning, took me about 10 or 15 minutes. So there were a lot of positives, and there are still some positives during this time. And I'm really hopeful that people that stayed home also had a time to kind of contemplate how they want to live their life and what's important and what's not. And maybe we'll come out of this, a more united society and closer to ourselves. Maybe I'm being a bit naive, but I'm hoping that it will do some good.
Me too. We will all continue to work towards a better future together. Daniel, we have not given up on bringing you to Maine, and hope that as soon as it is safe to do so, you can join the Maine Jewish community here, so that we continue to learn from you and get to know you and welcome you into our incredible community. Thank you to everyone who joined the call today. It's special to gather, even virtually. And I just want to lift up that the Center for Small Town Jewish Life has a few more virtual events on the calendar. So You can check our Facebook page. You can check our website. I will point out that we have another Shabbat service scheduled for May 15th. 8 of our main rabbis will be leading us in services. It's a beautiful way to start another Shabbat at home. And so with that, I will say happy Sunday, and I hope you all start a great week. Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel.